Welcome back to my channel, and since Kaeya's skin is finally out, I think it's the perfect time to finally make a Kaeya vid. I'll be covering talents, artifacts, weapons, team compositions, and more.
Balls.
Kaeya is one of the first characters we meet at the start of Genshin, and to be honest, he can be a really capable on and off-field character. His Constellations, which we'll talk about later, are also really good, and you can realistically C6 him if you buy copies from the shop. I personally think that he is pretty underrated, especially because of how good he is on melt teams and as a CRYO battery. Starting off with the talents, normal attack is the standard normal attack. It looks pretty cool but is pretty useless, unless you're building him for Fizz, which can be viable since he is CRYO, which is one half of Superconduct. His elemental skill is kinda like a shotgun spread of CRYO, which has a pretty decent multiplier and is gonna be a pretty big chunk of his damage in quick swap teams. His burst is his main source of sustained damage, and it works off-field similar to Xiangling's Pyronado. In fact, it's basically CRYO Pyronado with a smaller AoE. His A1 passive gives him a small heal every time you deal damage with his skill, equal to 15% of his attack. And his A4 passive makes it so that you will generate more particles if he manages to freeze enemies with his E. This is very useful in freeze teams, of course, and this makes him a very good battery for your other CRYO characters in the team, whether it be Ayaka, Ganyu, or Rosaria. Talent priority will be burst first and then skill, and if you're running him as an on-fielder, then go ahead and level up normal attacks. For his artifacts, Kaeya's ER requirement is a little easier to hit, especially in freeze teams, because of his particle generation. His ascension stat being energy recharge, and his 60 cost burst. For the stats, most of the time you will want attack on the sands, but if he is running as a solo CRYO in some teams where you're only really using him for his CRYO application off-field, you might want to use an energy recharge sands. Elemental mastery can be good in melt teams if your set or subs don't have EM, and goblet should always be CRYO, except if you're running on-field Fizz, which is a viable playstyle, and circlet should be running crit rate or crit damage, depending on what you need more of. Always try to get a 1:2 ratio, meaning 40 to 80, 50 to 100, 60 to 120, and so on. For the artifact sets, in Freeze, 4-piece Blizzard will almost always be the best choice because it gives you 40% crit rate from the effect, which is a lot of stats. 4-piece Emblem, even with his low ER requirements, is also great. Since you spend so long in that domain, it's probably usable on him because you probably have extra pieces. And if you don't have a good 4-piece of Blizzard or Emblem, feel free to mix and match the Blizzard set with Noblesse, attack sets, or Emblem while farming for a 4-piece. In Melt, 4-piece Emblem and 4-piece Gilded Dreams will most often be your best choices. 4-piece Emblem for the burst damage, of course, and 4-piece Gilded for the EM and the attack it provides. If you don't have a 4-piece Gilded, the 2-piece combo of EM, Blizzard, or attack can be fine. I'm personally running 2-piece Blizzard, 2-piece Wonders, because those are just my best pieces right now. 4-piece Lava Walker can also be a viable option if you spend time in the Crimson Witch of Pain domain. For his weapons, all of the 5 stars are pretty good in both Freeze and Melt. They're just all decent stat sticks, with Lo-Fi, Jade Cutter, Haran, and Mist Splitter being the best options. For 4 stars, my favorite recommendation for Reverse Melt would be the Lion's Roar. This weapon is extremely underrated and can outperform a lot of the 5 stars at high refinement due to the passive giving you extra damage on enemies affected by Electro or Pyro. And in Reverse Melt, they're almost always going to be affected by Pyro. Kazuha's sword is a great option as you can snapshot the attack passive for his burst. Okay, so a lot of people are asking about snapshotting, and I get this question a lot, so I just want to quickly explain in like Razor language. The term snapshotting refers to the state in which attributes are fixed on a long-lasting ability, effect, entity, or summon based off the character's abilities during the ability's activation. This works with a lot of characters. A snapshotted ability will not receive the additional buffs the character obtains after its activation. For example, if in a rotation you Xiangling burst before you Bennett burst, and then you switch back to Xiangling and step into Bennett's circle, you will not get the attack buff that Bennett's circle provides on your Pyronado. But what this also means is that any buffs you get before activation of Pyronado will be applied for the rest of Pyronado's duration, even if the buffs that you received at the start aren't there anymore. This works with Kaeya, by the way, which is why I think this weapon is really good. Kazuha Sword Curse Blade Kagutsorobe Ishin, I don't know how to pronounce it. For his burst, you can actually snapshot the attack buff it provides. So the way that this weapon works is that it'll give you an attack buff, increasing your attack by 15% for 8 seconds. So if I look at my stats right now, 1.9, if I were to receive the buff, 2k, I have 2k attack, and then I burst after, that extra 15% attack will apply to the entire duration of my burst, even if the buff from the sword isn't in effect anymore. So this also works in conjunction with Bennett's buff. So if I were to burst with Bennett and get the sword's buff, This 3.2k attack will be applied to my entire burst if I were to burst like right now. Basically, apply all your buffs before using your burst. Another great 4-star option for both freeze and reverse melt is Favonius, and you already know this weapon series is broken and will make most of your rotations smoother. Now that you know how to build Kaeya, let's talk about teams. My personal favorite team would be Reverse Melt with Bennett, Zhangling, and a flex unit. Usually I use Rosaria, but you can use Kazuha or Sucrose for extra damage. Kaeya Freeze is another one I like to use. This one is super flexible and you can basically just use Kaeya, an Anemo unit, usually Kazuha, and literally any other Hydro or Cryo characters because his burst works off-field. If you're using an on-fielder like Ayato, Barbara, or Kokumi, he could just work as a fully off-field Cryo applicator. And if you're using him on-field with like Chong Yun, you could just use Xingqiu or Yelan for an off-field Hydro. Personally, my favorite Kaeya Freeze team isn't that meta because it's a Husbando team with Ayato and Child because those are just my favorite units from those elements, all in one team. Kaeya as a Cryo unit in Fridge is also viable with him as the off-field applicator paired with any Dendro and Hydro unit with Kuki or Raiden as the Hyper Bloom carry. For Fridge, what I usually run would be like Alhaitam, Kaeya, Xingqiu, and Kuki. This team is super solid. The only caveat to this team is that you have to like give 4-piece Deepwood to maybe Alhaitam or Xingqiu. Usually I'll make it Xingqiu. It's a very solid team. If the enemies are freezable, this team is super good. And then of course you have Kuki as the off-field healer and Hyper Bloom carry in this team. Alhaitam basically has 100% uptime on Dendro, and Xingqiu's Hydro application is insane. Kaeya can also just be used as a battery in teams like Ayaka teams to generate extra particles and deal some off-field damage with the Blizzard set. And finally, let's talk about Constellations, as he is one of the only characters, one of 3 actually, that you can guarantee Constellations on if you are willing to wait, because he is and forever will be in the shop rotation along with Amber, Lisa, and everyone else. C1 gives you extra crit rate on his normal and charge attacks, which can be useful if you're using him as an on-fielder, but isn't really that big of an upgrade since his skill and his burst are his main sources of damage. C2 extends your burst duration for up to 15 seconds if you're able to get takedowns while this burst is up. This is really good on chambers where there are a lot of enemies since you can easily max out this effect and max out the duration, but on bosses or in chambers with only 2 enemies like the Consecrated Beasts, this isn't that big of a DPS increase at all actually. C3 is just talent levels. It gives his skill 3 more levels, which is nice to have I guess. C4 is kinda cool. It gives him a sort of emergency shield. C4 is kinda cool. It gives him sort of like an emergency shield when he falls below 20% HP. It's not that useful, but it's pretty cool that they gave him a shield. I think Kaeya and Yanfei are the only characters that suddenly gain a shield from Constellation, so that's kinda nice. Both on the C4 as well. C5 increases your burst levels, which is a pretty good damage increase since this is his main source of damage. And C6 gives you an extra icicle on his burst, as well as reducing his energy cost by 15, effectively making him a 45 burst cost character. So this is great because it increases his overall damage by quite a bit and also helps with his cryo application because that's an extra icicle on his burst. Also, 15 energy is huge. 15 energy with ER as your ascension passive makes it so like you basically don't have to think about his energy. Like you can run him with like 20 ER on the substats and he should almost always be okay with that. If you made it this far, thank you, and I appreciate you all so much. And if you like this type of content, feel free to sub. And if you're a Twitch degen, then check me out on twitch.tv/Smitty. Oh, you're doing tricks. And I'll leave you guys with a short Kaeya showcase, and I'll see you next time.